Chapter 10, Digging for the Dead. Picture this, you're trapped in a cursed village, and you need a corpse to survive. The good news? You know where bodies are buried. The bad news? You have to dig them up in the dark. And as you're working by moonlight, shoveling through frozen ground, you notice something that makes your blood run cold. There's one extra person standing in the shadows. Someone who shouldn't be there. Someone who isn't breathing. And they're getting closer. Would you keep digging? Or would you run? The fracturing. The 3-day deadline hung over the group like a guillotine blade suspended by fraying rope. With each passing hour, the atmosphere deteriorated further, transforming what had once been a functional team into something fragile and volatile, held together only by the thinnest threads of necessity. By the afternoon of the second day, those threads finally began to snap. It started with something absurdly mundane, a meal that wasn't to someone's liking. Qiushi, usually the easygoing peacemaker of the group, suddenly erupted over the food Xiaoku had prepared. His temper, frayed by days of stress and terror, exploded with shocking violence. What the hell is this supposed to be? His voice carried a harsh edge that made everyone in the room freeze. The argument escalated with frightening speed. Words became sharper, voices louder, accusations more personal. Xiong grabbed his bowl and hurled it toward the doorway with enough force that it shattered against the frame, sending fragments of ceramic and rice scattering across the floor like shrapnel. The sound of breaking porcelain echoed through the house with a finality that felt symbolic. Something fundamental had just broken, and it wasn't just the bowl. Xiaoku stared at him with an expression that cycled rapidly through shock, hurt, and finally settling on cold fury. Without a word, she turned and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her so hard that the walls shook. In the aftermath, the remaining people stood in uncomfortable silence, not meeting each other's eyes, each person acutely aware that they'd just witnessed something shift. A boundary had been crossed. Civility was no longer a given. The atmosphere of suspicion spread through the air like a contagion, invisible but palpable, settling into every corner of the house. Teammates who should have been able to rely on each other had become objects of doubt and fear. A simple conversation could now trigger paranoia. A single gesture, a lingering glance, even the way someone breathed could become the spark that set off an avalanche of accusations and violence. This was the first time Lin Qiushi felt it with such crystalline clarity. They were breaking. The pressure of death, the weight of suspicion, the grinding stress of their impossible situation, it was all becoming too much. They were approaching the breaking point, that threshold beyond which people stop being rational creatures and become something else entirely. The straw that would break them was coming. It was only a matter of when. The solution. Wuan Baijie seemed to have anticipated this deterioration. She showed no surprise at the outburst, no shock at the group's unraveling. Instead, she found a quiet corner and settled into it with her characteristic grace, observing the increasingly neurotic behavior of the others with the detached interest of a scientist watching lab rats navigate a maze. After several minutes of tense silence, she spoke, her voice cutting through the oppressive quiet with unexpected clarity. Have you all forgotten? There's another place with corpses. The effect of those words was immediate and profound. It was like rain falling on parched earth, like oxygen flooding into a suffocating room. The atmosphere, which had been wound so tight it seemed ready to snap, suddenly loosened by several crucial degrees. Qiushi, still breathing hard from his earlier outburst, turned toward her with desperate hope in his eyes. What place? Lin Qiushi's mind raced to the obvious answer, the graveyard. But I looked before, I couldn't find where this village buries its dead. There are no markers, no cemetery that I could locate. Naturally it's not a graveyard, Wuan Baijie said, her tone suggesting she found the suggestion almost quaint. Burial in this world probably isn't as simple as we'd imagine. The rules here are different. Then where? Lin pressed, feeling hope beginning to kindle in his chest. Ruan's eyes glinted with something that might have been dark amusement. Remember a few days ago, when you were carrying the tree? Those people who got crushed to death. Understanding hit Lin like a physical blow. That's right, they count as dead things, don't they? Let's go, Ruan continued, as if she were suggesting a casual afternoon walk rather than grave robbery. Find the right time, dig up their bodies, and the well-filling problem is solved. Then everyone can stop acting like this. The suggestion landed with the force of salvation. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly, tension draining away as people latched onto this lifeline with desperate gratitude. But it wasn't entirely relaxed. Relief was tempered by uncertainty. After all, nobody knew for certain whether the bodies could even be found. It had been snowing continuously since the day of the tree-carrying incident. The corpses would be buried under feet of accumulated snow, frozen solid, difficult to locate and harder still to excavate. But however difficult it might be, it was undeniably simpler than murder. Easier than looking a teammate in the eye and deciding their life was worth less than your own survival. The preparation. Once the idea took hold, everyone recognized the urgency. Time was slipping away, and they needed to act quickly before circumstances changed, before the 3-day deadline expired and desperate measures became the only measures. What surprised Lin most was how readily everyone accepted the plan. From start to finish, not a single person raised an objection or expressed moral qualms about digging up and desecrating the bodies of their former companions. But when he thought about it more carefully, he understood. This was the best available option, perhaps the only option that didn't require them to become murderers. And even if something went wrong during the excavation, even if the ghost or the cold or simple misfortune claimed someone in the process, well, that would simply provide the dead thing they needed. The horrifying pragmatism of that calculation wasn't lost on Lin. They'd reached a point where potential casualties had become acceptable, even useful. Half an hour later, the group assembled at the door of the house. Every man held a shovel, the metal heads catching what little light filtered through the gray sky. The women bundled themselves in layers of clothing, preparing for the cold journey ahead. Let's go. Qiushi had a cigarette clenched between his teeth, his last one, brought from the real world, and therefore smoked with particular care, savored like a precious relic of normalcy. We have to dig them out today. No matter what. Cheng Wen, the man who'd hunted Wang Xiaoyi through the halls the previous night, looked even worse in daylight. His eye sockets were sunken and ringed with red, the whites of his eyes threaded with broken blood vessels that gave him a crazed, fevered appearance. His entire demeanor radiated barely contained hysteria. If we don't dig them out, we all die. As he spoke, he shot a venomous glare at Wang Xiaoyi and Lin Qiushi, his eyes promising violence deferred but not forgotten. Lin met his stare unflinchingly, returning the hostility measure for measure. He wasn't about to back down, wasn't about to let Cheng Wen think intimidation would work. Let's move, Wan Baichia called out, breaking the staring contest. Xiong took the lead, and the group trudged toward the mountain path in a loose procession, their footsteps crunching through the snow in an irregular rhythm. The journey. The weather pattern had been consistent, snow fell at night, while days remained clear, if bitterly cold. The accumulated snow had piled up in thick drifts, and each step sank into soft powder that made walking exhausting. Their footprints left a clear trail behind them, marking their passage like breadcrumbs in a fairy tale, though whether they'd lead to salvation or doom remained to be seen. After roughly 40 minutes of hiking, they reached the familiar mountain path. Further up lay the timber forest where the tragedy had occurred. The landscape around them was beautiful in a harsh, inhospitable way. Trees stood like skeletal sentinels, their bare branches heavy with snow. The silence was profound, broken only by their breathing and the crunch of their footsteps. It was the kind of silence that made you painfully aware of your own existence, your own vulnerability. Should be around here somewhere. Xiong examined the area, trying to orient himself, but the snow had transformed the landscape, erasing familiar landmarks and making everything look the same. We can only narrow it down to a general area. Everyone start digging here. Lin nodded, gripping his shovel tighter, and drove it into the snow with more force than necessary. The physical exertion felt good, felt purposeful, better than sitting in that house feeling the walls close in. The path wasn't wide, but the potential search area stretched quite far in both directions. Finding the bodies would be like finding needles in a haystack, except the haystack was made of frozen water and the needles were human corpses. But everyone worked diligently. No one shirked their duty or made excuses. They all understood what was at stake. The Watchers. Ruan Baijie didn't dig. Instead, she found a large rock near the path and settled onto it, producing a small bag of sunflower seeds from somewhere in her coat. She cracked them methodically, eating the seeds and letting the shells fall where they may, the picture of relaxed indifference. Her casual demeanor formed a stark contrast with Xiao Ke's nervous, frantic energy as the other woman shoveled snow with jerky, inefficient movements. Perhaps unable to tolerate Ruan's nonchalance any longer, Xiao Ke suddenly spoke up, "Aren't you afraid of dying? When you die in this world, you die in the real world too." Ruan's response was lazy, almost bored, "Of course I'm afraid." "Then why do you look like that?" Xiao Ke demanded, her voice rising with frustration. Ruan didn't even bother looking at her, treating her with the kind of casual dismissal you'd give to empty air. Her tone dripped with contempt. Everyone reacts to fear differently. Some people cry, some people laugh. I like to eat sunflower seeds. She extended her hand and deliberately scattered shells across the pristine white path. And I like to litter. Xiao Ke opened her mouth, then closed it again. She could feel that Ruan was mocking her, toying with her, but couldn't formulate a response. Finally, she just muttered a curse under her breath and stalked away, her shoulders rigid with suppressed anger. Ruan's expression remained somewhere between amusement and indifference, but Lin noticed something else. From the moment they'd arrived at this location, Ruan's eyes had been fixed on him. Not casually glancing his way, but watching him with sustained, focused attention, as if he were the most fascinating thing in this entire cursed landscape. It was unsettling, but Lin forced himself to ignore it. He kept his head down, concentrating on the work, moving his shovel in steady, methodical strokes, praying they'd find the bodies quickly. Nightfall. But the universe, as it often does, refused to cooperate with human prayers and plans. They'd set out late in the day, and after only an hour of digging, darkness began to descend across the landscape like a closing curtain. The transition from twilight to night felt unnaturally fast, as if time itself moved differently here. Snow began falling again, soft flakes drifting down from the black sky in lazy spirals, landing on their shoulders and hair, melting against their warm skin before freezing again. Lin exhaled sharply into his cupped hands, trying to warm his stiff, frozen fingers. He looked up at the sky, assessing their situation. The moon tonight was impressive, huge and luminous, hanging in the darkness like a pale eye. It cast enough light across the snow-covered landscape that the forest wasn't completely dark. Everything took on a strange quality in the moonlight. Shadows became deeper, shapes became ambiguous, and the line between real and imagined became perilously thin. Xiong stood nearby, talking with Xiao Ke while continuing to shovel. His earlier aggression had subsided, replaced by grim determination. Chengwen hadn't stopped either, though he muttered curses under his breath as he worked, his movements quick and violent, as if he were digging with fury rather than mere physical effort. The three women, Ruan Baijie, Wang Xiaoyi, and Xiao Ke, stood at the edge of the path, not helping with the digging but watching. Silent observers, their figures dark against the white snow. They just stood there, perfectly still, watching Lin Qiushi. The extra person. Lin continued digging, but gradually became aware of something wrong. It was subtle at first, just a prickling sensation at the back of his neck, the kind of feeling you get when you're being watched by more eyes than you can account for. He lifted his head and looked toward where Wan Baijie stood. 3 people. 1 tall, 2 short. The 2 shorter figures stood close together, so close they appeared to be holding hands in a gesture of intimacy or solidarity. Lin's hands froze on his shovel. Something was wrong. Very wrong. What's the matter? Xiong noticed Lin's sudden stillness. Lin Qiushi. You okay? Something seems strange, Lin said carefully, not wanting to trigger panic but unable to shake the feeling crawling up his spine. Strange how? That was Xiao Ku's voice. And that's when Lin realized what was wrong, what his subconscious had been trying to tell him. He did the count in his head, they were 6 people total. Xiong Qi, Xiao Ku, Wang Xiaoyi, Cheng Wan, Wan Baijie, and himself. Xiao Ku was standing right next to Xiong Qi. He could hear her voice, could see her silhouette just a few yards away. So who were the 2 people holding hands beside Wan Baijie? Lin's throat went dry. His heart hammered against his ribs so hard he thought everyone must be able to hear it. But he forced himself to remain calm, to act natural. He continued moving his shovel, kept working, even as his mind raced. Wan Baijie, he called out, keeping his voice level and casual, come here for a second. I want to ask you something. Wan stood from her rock and walked toward him with unhurried steps, her boots making soft crunching sounds in the snow. What is it? Lin didn't answer immediately. His peripheral vision remained locked on those 2 holding hands, those 2 figures standing in the shadows cast by tree branches. They stood so close together that their forms nearly merged into one. Their heights were identical, unnaturally so. And the way they held hands, there was something wrong about it, something that suggested they were connected more permanently than 2 people choosing to touch. The shadows concealed their faces completely. He couldn't make out features, couldn't determine if they were male or female, living or dead. They were just dark shapes, human-shaped voids in the moonlight, and they weren't moving. Lin Qiushi. Ruan's voice held a note of curiosity now. What's wrong? Lin still didn't speak. He was waiting for her to get closer, waiting to be sure she was real, was Ruan, was human. He kept digging, kept his body language relaxed even as every nerve screamed danger. And then his shovel hit something that wasn't snow or frozen earth. Something that offered different resistance, something that felt unmistakably like the discovery. Ruan arrived in front of him just as he felt the shovel make contact with the unusual texture beneath the snow. She looked down, following his gaze, and saw what his shovel had uncovered, a frozen corpse, stiff and white with cold. You found one? Her voice brightened with something like genuine pleasure. Nice work. Lucky man. Only then did Lin fully register what he discovered. He bent down, brushing away more snow, revealing the dead body more fully. Currently, only a pair of pale, frozen hands were visible, reaching up from the snow like they were clawing for escape. But it was definitely one of their companions who'd been crushed during the tree-carrying incident and subsequently buried by accumulating snowfall. Found one. Lin shouted, loud enough for everyone to hear. His voice echoed slightly in the cold air, bouncing off trees and snow. But even as he called out, his eyes darted back to where he'd seen the 2 hand-holding figures. Now there was only one. A single silhouette, moving slowly toward them, walking with measured steps that seemed to take forever. When the figure finally moved into an area where moonlight fell directly, Lin recognized her, Wang Xiaoyi. Wang Xiaoyi approached and stopped beside Lin. She seemed to notice something odd in his expression because she asked, "Why are you looking at me like that?" Lin shook his head quickly, perhaps too quickly. Nothing. It's nothing. Wang Xiaoyi smiled, a gentle expression that transformed her face. Thank you. You're really amazing. She lowered her gaze to look at the corpse emerging from the snow pit, and her eyes held such tenderness, such warmth. If it weren't for you, I probably would have died last night. And now you've even found the body. Just lucky, Lin said, his voice tight. Then, moving with deliberate casualness, he reached out and took Ruan Baijia's hand, pulling her slightly closer. Come here a bit. Ruan felt his touch and raised an eyebrow slightly, surprised. She was about to speak when she felt Lin's finger begin to move against her palm, tracing something. He drew 4 strokes. The character 4, Wang. Wang Xiaoyi's surname. Understanding flashed through Ruan's mind almost instantaneously. She squeezed Lin's hand once, acknowledging that she understood the message. Then she looked down at the corpse and said, her voice perfectly normal, since we found it, let's hurry and bring the body back. Yes. Wang Xiaoyi's smile widened. Her enthusiasm seemed genuine, almost childlike. Let's go back quickly. But as she smiled, Lin noticed something he'd missed before. In the moonlight, Wang Xiaoyi cast no shadow. The snow around her feet was undisturbed, as if she weighed nothing at all. And when she breathed, or appeared to breathe, no vapor emerged from her mouth despite the freezing temperature. End of chapter 10. To be continued.